Hello and welcome to Quilting with Lori. Today we are going to be working on part 2 of my Bees in the Garden 2024 Block of the Month quilt. For those of you who have registered for this class, and you can do that by going out to my website, Quilting with Lori, and go in my shop and go down under courses, and you can register for this out there, and you'll get the information that you'll need. You'll have PDFs that have the introduction and supply list. You'll get the PDF for part 1, and then I'm going to be giving you the PDF for part 2 for those of you who are registered for this class. This class does offer 2 different options for you. The centers are basically the same for each of them, and they involve the Dresden flowers and the leaves and a bee block, but there are 2 different border options for you, and I'm going to be teaching you both of those border options. This is more of a piano key type, and this is an applique. So you'll have both options available, and you can decide when you get to that point which option you'd like to use for your border. So here is what we worked on last time. Last month we worked on the Dresdens, these beautiful Dresden blocks, and we're not sewing them together yet. We'll be putting them together in the quilt, and you'll see why here when we get to that point. But today we're going to be working on curved piecing and the leaves. These are the leaves blocks, so I've got 2 of them here. And what you'll want to make sure that you do is get your PDF both for the templates and for the instructions. And for those of you who have registered, you would have received an email from me with these 2 PDFs. And there are 3 different templates that you're going to need to get printed. Make sure this is printed at 100%. There's the A, or the background, the blue sky background. There's the C template, which is the dark green part of the leaf. There is the B template, which is the medium green center. And then there are some 2-inch squares that you're cutting from that medium green. So that's all that you're needing. And it gives you the information in the PDF on how many pieces that you need to cut to have everything that you need. And that's on page 3. We're going to need a total of 6 leaf blocks for each of the quilts. And you might be making both of them, you might be making one of them. So you're going to make 6 of them for each of the quilts. And this is my leaf block here. And these are the parts and pieces that you're going to need for each block. I need 2 of the backgrounds here, the sky backgrounds. I need 1 of the center of the leaf. I need 2 of the dark part of the leaf and 2 of the 2-inch squares. So 2, 2, 2, and just 1 of these for each block that we're going to create. Now, what you can do for cutting out your templates, you can either use this template plastic, which is what I have done to cut out. I traced my templates. Be sure to include that 1/4-inch seam allowance, because remember, we are piecing these curved seams. So we absolutely need all of these 1/4-inch seam allowances. So make sure when you trace, if you're tracing onto plastic template, that you're tracing including that 1/4-inch seam allowance. So you can trace it onto plastic template, or you can simply cut out these elements as if they're a paper pattern, just like when you're sewing a garment. You cut out the tissue paper patterns from the pattern, and then you pin it to your fabric. So if that's what you'd prefer to do, you're certainly welcome to do that. Just be careful that you're not cutting into the paper as you're cutting out each of the leaves and distorting the shapes of each of these. So I have gone ahead and I traced all of mine onto this plastic template, and then I simply traced that onto the wrong side of each of these fabrics, the blues, the green, and the dark green. And then, of course, I cut out the 2-inch squares that I needed. Now, once you have all of that cut and ready to go, now I'm going to show you how you piece this block together. The first thing you need to understand is that we are going to be piecing 2 separate units for each block. So the first thing we're going to do is piece these 3 units together. That's one side of the block. We'll piece that first. I want to make sure that you can actually see this. I'll get this down in the screen better here. The second unit that we're going to piece is this background to this dark side. And then, of course, these two little squares are going to go on each end of that. It doesn't look as if any of these parts and pieces will fit together, but they do. As long as you've traced and cut them properly, they will fit together just fine. And I'll show you how that is accomplished. As you're looking at it, it looks like there's no way that this could fit here. There's no way that this could fit there. And the same out here, but they all really will work out beautifully. You are working with a lot of bias, so keep that in mind. I did move this down a little farther so that you're able to see all of this. So this is one section or one unit that we're going to be sewing together first, and this is the other unit that we're going to be sewing together. So we'll create these two units separately, and then we'll sew it together as a block. And what I like to do with each and every piece is take it and fold it in half. Make sure there are creases when you fold it in half. Make sure you've got some really sturdy crease lines there, because those are going to be your guides, and they're really going to help you line everything up. And you could do this at the ironing board. You could take all 6 of your units or templates for all 6 blocks and just crease them at one time very quickly at the ironing board. But what I have done here now is I have created a crease line that will match this crease line, and this crease line matches that one, and this crease line will match this once I get this creased as well. But those crease lines are very important. You've got to have those all the way across all of the pieces. When we pin, we're going to start pinning at the center line here. Let me grab my pins, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is take this medium or the dark grain and match it to the medium grain. And I'm simply matching up those creased lines first of all, putting a pin there. And it looks pretty funky. So there's this one, and here's the medium grain. Now we're going to take this and bring it around to the side and pin that perfectly at the edge right there. So this is all kind of puffed up here, and that's okay. We'll take care of that in a minute. We're going to come over to this side, bring it around. We're going to pin it exactly on the edge of this. All right, so we have 3 pins in here right now, the center and the 2 ends. Now what we need to do is just make sure that the rest of this lays nicely. And one side or the other is going to have a little bit more fabric. And when you get it pinned, identify which side has more fabric and make sure that you place that down on the feed dogs as you're sewing. And that will just help to feed everything in there evenly. So what I'm doing here is just simply going through, and you can put as many pins as you want to help you, especially if you're just new to sewing curves. So there we go. Now it's more tamed. I've got everything under control here. Now it's all pinned. So I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and I'm going to start here at a 1/4 inch, a scant 1/4 inch, probably 1 thread less than a 1/4 inch. And I'm going to go ahead and sew all the way around. As I start sewing, I will remove the pins as I get to them. I will not remove them until I just come upon them, and then I will remove them. That will help ensure that my seam allowances stay even. And you can, if you need to, get your hand underneath and kind of maneuver things if you need to make sure that there's no folds that you're sewing into the seam. So you can go ahead and sew this. Now you might feel, because there's a lot of bulk here, that you might want to actually sew it where this dark green is on the feed dogs. And I would recommend trying both ways until you're comfortable with either sewing it this way or sewing it this way as you go across that seam allowance. And for me, I can actually sew it either direction. It doesn't matter, and it works out fine. But it's very important that you start by pinning the center, pinning the ends, and then pinning the rest of it as you go through. So let me take this to the sewing machine, and we'll get it sewed. All right, I've just placed my needle in there, and I've got things started. I removed the first pin, and now I'm simply going to go around the seam allowance and remove pins just before I get to those. I do not want to sew over a pin, but I also don't want to remove the pin too early. I want to make sure that my seam allowances stay nice and even. And you'll notice here, I think I'm going to put my needle position down. I'm going to kind of maneuver my top fabric here so I'm not sewing a crease. You can do that from the top or from the bottom, depending on how you have your pieces laying in the machine here. And I'm almost at the end. There we go. Now, because I have used a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, you do not have to do any clipping on the seam allowances. It's not necessary. It will lay beautifully. And I'll take that up and I'll get that pressed here in a minute. I've simply finger pressed to the dark, as you'll see there. I just simply finger pressed it. My iron is actually upstairs, so I'll need to take this block upstairs and do the pressing. But for the time being now, I'm going to go ahead and get this blue sky or the sky blue fabric on. And it doesn't look like there's any way that this is going to fit on there. If you look at that, it looks like there's just way too much fabric on both sides for this to actually fit. But you'll be surprised. We're going to pin in the same way as we did before. So here are my center points there that I creased on there. I am going to make sure to match those up. I'm going to put a pin in the centers there. First of all, I'm going to bring this around to the side. I'm making sure that's perfectly parallel there, perfectly level. Put a pin there. Now it's kind of up in the air. There's a lot of bulk right there, but we'll take care of that here in a minute. I'm going to take this end around to this side, and I'm simply going to pin it so that it's perfectly parallel. All right, so it looks pretty funny right now, but we're going to go ahead and continue pinning. And you'll remember this is all bias here, and it works out just beautifully. You could, if you wanted, to have additional creases on both pieces so that you can keep matching up the creases. I am simply just kind of fingering my way around here and making sure that it's kind of level or even on each side of that pin. And again, there's more fabric on the green, the dark green fabric, so that would probably be a good idea for you to make sure that the dark green was on the feed dogs so that the feed dogs can help to distribute that extra fabric evenly. So I'm simply going around and pinning here. All right, here we go. I have my pinning done. I'm going to start, I think I'm going to start like this. I'm going to keep my green on the feed dogs and start sewing here and come all the way around. I've started sewing up there, and I've got the green on the bottom because there was a lot more bulk or more fabric in the green. And so I've got my sky blue on the top and sewing around a scant 1/4 inch, removing pins just as I come upon them. I don't want to sew over them, but I don't want them to be removed too early. Just helps to keep my seam allowances perfectly even. And there we go. Let me put these pins over here before they fly away. All right, and there is the blue sky. It worked out perfectly. Hopefully you can see a better shot of the whole piece here. Let me make sure I'll bring it to the center. So there's a little bit on each end, but it's all perfectly straight, ready to go. It lays beautifully. I have finger pressed both of these away from the center at this point. I may change this dark to press it toward the center itself when I get to the point of adding the other unit. But for right now, I've just finger pressed everything away from the center. So that unit is ready. Now we have to make the corresponding side of the block, the opposite side, so that we can put the whole unit together. And we'll start by putting this dark green with the light blue, the sky. And of course, I've got my creases here and a crease here. So I'm going to flip my sky on top there and start pinning here. And I'm going to, again, go around and pin first on the very end, very carefully so that it's nice and parallel there. It's perfectly even. Then come over here and bring this one so that I can't get my fingers on it. There we go. And we'll pin that. I'm trying to keep my fingers out of the way, but I'm not doing a very good job of it. All right, so we have 3 pins in here right now. Now I have to pin the rest of this and the rest of this, just like I did over there, and then I'm going to sew this unit again. This unit has been sewn, and I finger pressed it away. So it's ready to go. So we have this unit ready and we have this unit ready. But before we can put them together, I need to add these 2 little 2-inch squares to both ends. And when you put these squares on, make sure as you're sewing them on that they match up beautifully to the green section. They may not entirely cover the blue sky, and that's okay. But you want to make sure that they start and end so they match the green part perfectly. And then we'll put it under here and we'll sew it. Let me make sure that you can see what I'm doing. I had to rethread my needle. So now I am just sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Got stuck there. Here we go. On the end. And there we have it. So that 2-inch square is sewn on one end, and now I'm going to bring it around here and I'm going to sew the 2-inch square on the other end. All right. So now my pieces are ready to be sewn together. Let me get you back over to the table so you can see me put this together. All right, I have the 2 units ready to go together. These are simply finger pressed. I would recommend that you go ahead and press it at your ironing board, but I'm being lazy. I'm not heading upstairs yet to do the pressing until the block is done. But I have made sure that my center crease is in both of these units here, and I'm going to match these 2 up. So I'm going to flip that on top, match up those center creases. So if you look at it, it looks pretty funny. Now I'm going to bring this around to the side, just like we did before, and make sure that it goes all the way to the end, just like that. And bring this one around to the side, and sew or pin it. So now we've got to get the rest of this pinned, just as we had done previously. So I'm going to start kind of in the middle and keep adding pins as I go around that seam. And this time I will I'm going to nest this as well. I wanted to make sure to point that out. You want to nest the corners there so that the dark green and the medium green, those seam allowances match perfectly. So make sure you nest those. That's very important. So I'm nesting that over there, pinning that. All right, there it is. It's ready to take to the sewing machine, and I'll start over here and I'll simply sew a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around again. I wanted to point out, I'll give you a close-up. This is what I'm referring to when you're nesting these together. Make sure that these match up beautifully. So you're nesting the mediums and the dark greens as you're pinning those together. So make sure you accomplish that as you're going around and pinning everything. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this, and you've seen me sew this already, so I'm going to just do it and I'll bring it back to the tabletop, and you can see the finished result here in just a moment. All right, I have mine pressed, and go ahead and press yours. You can press them toward the center or away, whichever works out best for you, for them to lay nicely. When you square it up, you're going to square up each block to 9.5 inches, and make sure that your 9.5-inch square up ruler is actually making sure that you're using these two corners as your guide, and then you're going to trim away the excess blue sky. You'll find that because there's so much bias in here, there is some excess pieces of fabric that are going to need to come away from that. And so that's what I had to trim away. But I've got I think I have all 6 of mine ready now. I guess 3 are over here at the sewing machine. So they're ready to be put together. You could, if you wanted to, put together the first or the bottom 3 rows if you're making this quilt. If you're making the one with the green border, I guess you can still put the bottom 3 rows together. You'll want to wait until we have our B block finished before you finish that top row there of the flower. And I need to get caught up. I know some of you already have both of your flowers completely done. I need to get my second grouping of flowers ready to go. But I've now got my leaves ready, and I'm going to work on my second grouping of my Dresden flower. And the next time in May, we are going to make the beautiful little B block, as well as all of these border blocks for the piano key type border. And then in June, we'll be working on the applique. I've laid it out so you can kind of see a little bit about how it's going to go together. One of the flowers will be here, another flower will be there, and then the leaves will be down below, as you can see here. And then up in this area, we'll have another sky block as well as the bumblebee block on the side. And it's just adorable. I cannot wait to finish this one and the other one. I'm actually going to be making 2. So I need to get to work and get caught up with some of you. Some of you are ahead of me. And hopefully you're enjoying this. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. Please leave some comments below and let me know what your fabrics are, what you're working on, and whether or not you're making the applique or the piano key wall quilt.